Good afternoon. Welcome to our panel, Surviving Challenging Job Markets, Advice from Alumni Who've Been There. My name is Nicole Anderson. I'm an Associate Director of Alumni Career Services in the Tufts Career Center and in Alumni Relations. And I'm excited today that we have two alums who are going to talk to us about and provide their personal stories about surviving challenging job markets. I'm going to introduce both of them in a minute, but before that I want to provide a few housekeeping items about our online program today. We are recording this session, so just be aware of that. If you would like to turn your video off, that's fine. And we are going to be addressing questions. So if you have questions throughout, you can type those into the chat box, and I will be reading the chat. My colleague who's behind the scenes, John Sanford, is going to be helping me, and we'll try to get those questions addressed either during the session when you're asking them, or we will push them to the end. We did get some questions beforehand from registrants, so we will address those too. We haven't forgotten about those. So without further ado, I'm actually going to ask our audience if you don't mind typing into the chat box whether you are an undergraduate student, a grad student, or an alum. Just throw that in there into the chat so we know who is online today. That would be great. So let's see here what we have. So far I've got 5, 6 undergrads, 2 grad students, another undergrad, so 7 undergrads, 2 grad students. Okay, so no alums. So we know who we're talking to. That helps us out. Thank you. And I'm sure we're going to have some people join late. We actually have 16 so far. So, all right. So I'm going to do brief intro of our two panelists, and I'm going to let them do a more extensive introduction of themselves. I'm going to start with Jay Chung, who is from the class of 1999, Arts and Sciences, and he is a manager in IS Management and Training at Mass General Brigham Hospital, which is in Boston. And I'm going to ask Jay, if you don't mind doing a more detailed intro.
Sure. Thanks, Nicole. So first of all, it's a pleasure and it's a privilege to be able to talk to all of you, even though it's virtually, and it's great to reconnect with my fellow jumbos. So as Nicole said, I am a manager for Mass General Brigham, formerly known as Partners Healthcare, which is comprised of, I'm sure some of you have heard, hospitals like Brigham and Women's, Mass General, Newton Wellesley. It's a huge, large network of hospitals. I'm within their information systems team, which is sort of, I guess, good flow from when I graduated, because I was a computer science major when I went to Tufts. And so now I work for the Brigham Health Information Systems Group, leading and managing a team of 15 people, amongst many different types of projects, overseeing implementations of systems, integration of systems, supporting our Epic electronic medical record system, and other enterprise type projects, rolling out Windows 10 and so forth. Most recently, as you guys, we've all in here been dealing with it with COVID-19. In my role in my team, we've had to also provide and help set up virtual care technologies, supporting our frontline staff workers like the physicians and nurses, and training them and being on site, quite often during the worst of it here, giving them support and helping them utilize those technologies so that they could use that for patient communication and as well as with their colleagues to lower their risk of exposure. So in a nutshell, that's what I do, and I've been in the computer IT industry, if you will, pretty much my whole career since I graduated from Tufts, and I look forward to talking more with all of you.
Thanks, Jay. And we do look forward to hearing more about, your path. Next, I'd like to introduce Connor Moran, and he is from the class of 2007, Arts and Sciences, and he is currently in sales at Amazon Advertising. And I will let him provide a more detailed bio. Thanks, Connor.
Yeah. Hey everyone, pleasure to be speaking with you all today. Tufts was a very, very special time in my life, so it's nice to be able to reconnect with some fellow jumbos or connect for the first time. Yeah, and as Nicole said, I graduated in '07, and there was a pretty big recession shortly thereafter. I was an English major. I didn't really have like too much of a set career path that I had mapped out by the time I was a college graduate. So, it's led me on a long and winding route to Amazon, where I work in the advertising org right now in a sales role. And, happy to connect with anyone that's interested one-on-one afterwards if you're interested in, that type of career path. But yeah, Nicole, did I miss anything?
No, I think that's good for now. We'll get
Great.
into detail with the questions. So I'm going to actually start off, and Connor, if it's okay, we'll just stick with you. I remember when I was talking to both you and Jay about the difficult periods that you encountered, and you each had some pretty interesting stories, the ups and downs. So I'm going to ask if you don't mind talking about more in depth about that difficult period. Did you lose your job? Were you laid off? Where were you working? How long were you out of work? And just what that period of time was like, and how you got to how you motivated yourself to get back into a job search, and what happened.
Yeah, sure. So, I started off, I kind of fell into a job a few months after graduating from Tufts in advertising at an agency called Initiative, which is part of the IPG family of agencies, IPG being like, one of the biggest holding companies in global advertising. And I was there for about a year and a half. And then, there was a big, the Great Recession starting in '08, kind of had some ripples, throughout into '09. It was March of '09, I got laid off from the ad agency. I had just gotten my first promotion there about 3-4 months earlier. So I was like kind of riding high, and then so I had the rug pulled out from under me. And then I was actually out of work for quite a while after that. And I can gladly talk about some of the things I would have done differently, but it was actually a little over a year before I was, back to work at a full-time job. And incidentally, I actually got hired back at the agency that I had gotten laid off on. My next job was also back at Initiative. But yeah, I know that we have some questions lined up for later, so I don't know if I should go into the detail there now, but that's just kind of broadly, my experience in the, navigating the job market in a recession, where I got laid off and then was struggling to get back, especially having one of the mistakes I made being, I just got the promotion I was very happy about. I was kind of looking for jobs at that same level, but with only 3 months of experience and with the economy at that time still on the decline, that was very hard. And so, one of the lessons that I learned was actually in getting hired back at the agency was I started back at an entry-level position, although I moved from TV advertising to digital, which as the years have gone by, that was very fortuitous. So it opened up a lot more opportunities for me in the long run, but I had to make some, in the short term, very a difficult decision.
Yeah, why don't we, thank you, Connor. Let's transition over to Jay and hear his story, and then we can get more details.
Sure. So, yeah, this is exactly like Connor. I think prior to, what we're facing now, besides what Connor just explained, the recession around 2008, 2009, the previous one really, if people remember, is the one I went through, which is the recession of 2001 with the dot-com bubble bursting and then 9/11 hitting. So I graduated in '99. At that time, employment was great. You know, there's a period of massive expansion, all these startup companies, you name it, like every company that's seemingly sprung up was like an internet-based company. And so that's where I got my first job right away after graduation, got a great job, high salary, you know, like Connor says, really riding high. I mean, you think about it, like graduated from Tufts, it seemed like the world was in front of me, you know, really celebrated with my friends, and even, you know, kind of bragged also like about like, you know, the high salary that I got. You know, worked there, my first company, a place called Extra Prize in downtown Boston. And then about, you know, a year later, I thought, you know, with the economy that seemed like it was still humming, I you know, met a recruiter, which was very hot and popular at the time, like to see, hey, was there anything else that I could continue to just, you know, advance in my career? And I got another opportunity at another internet startup company called SupplyWorks, and started there in November of 2000. And then, but however, you know, the recession came along in early 2001. And I think one of the questions Nicole asked me was, did I anticipate it? You know, I think I sensed it because I had friends in the industry that started getting laid off, and this was like around March when the recession first started. And, you know, you hear about it, you think about it, but you never think it's going to happen to you. But then in June of 2001, I was, you know, called to the office by my manager at the time. I was an analyst. And so I got called to the office just one day and sat down with him and the VP, and they told me that they were laying me off. And basically that was probably, it's been like almost 20 years later, and I still remember that moment like as it was like yesterday. You know, you don't forget those moments, and you know, you really get humbled, and you know, you get upset. And you know, what made it harder too was, you know, I was escorted off the property, you know, shortly after that. And you know, with people sort of looking on like, what's going on? It was a small place, so everyone kind of knew each other, and so you kind of felt a little embarrassed, and you kind of you know, had to pick up your stuff and just leave, and like, you know, it felt like you did something wrong. And so that was very humbling. And you know, I think for me, you know, I took a step back and, you know, reminded myself, hey, you're not the only one. So, you know, what do you do now? It's like, you know, the summer was just starting 2001. You know, I think that, you know, probably the thing I'll go into a little bit later was I knew I had to eventually look for a job, but I didn't take it probably as much urgency and sort of with full force as I should have started. So I kind of just waited and thinking that a new job would be there for me, like probably after the summer, after I sort of enjoyed the time during the summer. But I started looking for a job in the fall, and it took a little while. You know, I applied to every job online, and you know, I just didn't know, you know, when I'd get calls back. And then one day, I think it was around like November or so, I had a friend who was also laid off say, hey, you know, what do you think about this career fair at this hotel? It was like a hotel, I think in Waltham, or you know, and at the time, like I was skeptical, right? Career fair with, you know, okay, I'll go and just, you know, let's just have some fun. And I went there, and like, you know, all these employers, the booths, just kind of ton of people, of course. So I'm like, okay, how am I going to stand out in this crowd? So, you know, just met each booth, met each employer, you know, try to give them my resume, like amongst all the hundreds I'm sure they're getting. Then I stumbled upon a company called Meditech, which I never heard of. I'm like, what's Meditech? It's a medical software company. I met the recruiter at the time, and she gave me her card. I didn't think much of it, to be honest. When I got home, I was just sort of like, you know, digesting the day, and I looked at the card. I was like, oh, I get this card here. Like, maybe I'll just email her and just remind myself, hey, I met you, and I'd love to have an opportunity to meet with your team and all that. So I sent her an email, and then, you know, I think the next following day, she emailed me back, called me, talked to me, and then invited me to an interview. And I was like, oh, wow, this is getting somewhere. And then, you know, I went to the interview, and then, to be honest, the rest is history, because that's what really started my career in healthcare IT. And like Connor's theme, you know, I had to, you know, I had to take a step back. It was an entry-level position. So, and I had to pretty much, you know, cut my salary in half, and start basically all over. It was like a reset experience for me. I mean, you know, I wasn't a fresh grad. I graduated already a couple of years, worked a couple of years already. So, but for me, it was about like, okay, you got to put your ego aside, and, you know, just start, you know, take one step back. Hopefully that'll be two steps forward, and just be, you know, be willing to, you know, take advantage of the opportunity, because you never know what's going to lead for you down the road. And so, like I said, the rest is history. And, you know, that's the lesson I hope I can share today.
That's great. Now, Connor, I saw you nodding a lot.
Yeah,
I
quite a
think
bit. Yeah.
some things resonated with you. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, really a lot of that, Jay, we haven't gotten to speak about this together yet, but so much of that was really a similar experience to me. Definitely, I can still remember, it's such a vivid memory. You know, you get that call, seems a little strange. Why do I have to go down to like the fourth floor? I never go down there. And yeah, yeah, I mean, there's certain things you remember, happy stuff, bad stuff. And yeah, I
Mm,
can really relate to that experience. And I think just the
mm,
overall, you know, from that moment, and then smaller little things that come out from it. You know, you were talking a lot about the humbling and sort of putting your ego aside, like that really, I think for me was one of the sort of main components, I think, in it being difficult to get back in to the workforce is, you know, like putting your ego aside, being willing to sort of take a step back to ideally take two steps forward. So yeah, and yeah, that there was a bunch, but I definitely was certainly on the same page for pretty much all of that.
So I wanted to go back, Jay, to what you said about how it actually went down and how you were escorted out of the building. And for a lot of our younger or, our current students, on the call, this isn't unusual. You haven't done anything wrong, but it can feel shocking. It's the protocol, it's the policy for a company to, particularly if there's, data and information technology, they don't want you to have access. They want to get you right out of the building. They don't want you to take anything with you that is owned by the company. And so so when that happens, it's especially more emotional or maybe more disconcerting, because again, you could feel like, oh, I did something wrong, but you haven't. It's just that's the way that it has to happen. You mentioned, Jay, that you sort of were able to predict it, that, come March of 2001, you sensed it, and then, it was actually June of 2001 that it happened. I'm curious, Connor, were you, did it come as a complete shock, or were you sensing things? Did you have other friends who had been laid off?
Yeah, it's funny. This will probably kind of sound like an apocryphal story, but on the day that I got laid off, I remember I was walking to work. It was a nice day in March. And, like in the months preceding that, like Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers had collapsed. I didn't work in finance, but, there's every single day, there's all this talk of like, oh, like the global economy is like right on the brink. And I remember walking to work that day, and it'd been some months since all this is happening, and just thinking to myself, like, I mean, everyone's saying this is so bad. Like, it doesn't seem that bad. Like, they're likening it to the Great Depression. And I was like, my understanding of the Great Depression was like, just like people are standing outside in soup lines. And that was on that was my last day walking to that job, at least for a while.
Okay.
And then I walked in, I, got my coffee, I sat down, and around like 10 a.m., there's kind of like a buzz because I wasn't the first person that got called down. I mean, they were probably letting go about like, 30% or so of like the
That's a lot.
workforce on that day. So I had that thought, thinking like, like this doesn't seem like as bad as everyone's saying. And then I got a very, personal experience and a rude awakening to
Okay.
disabuse me of that notion.
Now, for both of you, you talked about the feeling humbled. Are you open to sharing any other kinds of emotions that you had at the time? Did it cause anger or depression, and how did you cope with those? Those are going to make it, those kinds of emotions are going to make a job search especially hard. I'm curious, and did anyone have any, strategies for you or offer you any advice on how to handle those emotions?
Yeah, I think that that's true, and probably Connor felt the same way. All those emotions, I would say depression is probably too strong of a word, but certainly, the shock, right, and then the confusion, and and then concern, and then discouragement. I think for me, that was probably the sequencing, if you will. I think. But that's human nature. You go through the emotions, right? If you don't go through the emotions, you're not human. And I think, what you have to do at the end is you got to, reset yourself and believe in yourself. You know, I
Mm.
think, you know, all of you here on this panel, and maybe I'm biased because I'm an alum, right? I went to Tufts too. You guys are all bright and successful. You just have to stay positive and keep pushing, you know, and don't let up. I think the advice I got back then, I think, was really from my father, who, you know, had a much tougher upbringing, you know, than I
Mhm.
did, and I could never like fill his shoes, him being an immigrant, all the struggles he went
Mhm.
through, and you know, he just told me like, hey, finding a job is a full-time job. Like, this is not, you don't like just get up, like, you know, and just kind of, just go online and then, you know, look for a couple jobs and call for a day. You know,
Mhm.
it's a full-time job, right? And I think that's what stuck with me. And I think, you know, really I feel like that's how eventually I was able to find my opportunity, is when I really rolled up my sleeves and say, hey, you know, I'm going to give it my 100% and, you know, and just do everything I can.
Mhm.
And so at least, so I don't live with any regrets at the end of the day, right?
Mm.
Did I put in enough energy and effort to this job search?
Mm.
Could I have done more? And I think if you guys all here do that, you know, there really shouldn't be anything you should feel ashamed about, right? I think
Mm.
what you would be, you know, will regret and feel ashamed about is, you know, if you didn't put on your full effort, you didn't think creatively, how can I go out there and market myself and put
Mm.
myself in front of people? Because there are definitely ways to do that besides the
Mm.
whole, you know, look for a job online and like submit your resume and
Mhm.
be on the pile of resumes now, which is probably worse nowadays than when I was applying, because it's going through this whole system behind the scenes, and if you don't have the right keywords, and it's you know, Connor probably can appreciate it, it's not a very personalized process. You know, it's like a luck of the draw. So, you know, you're going to have to put some effort and energy. Like, how can I stick out from the pack? And I still think for me, like, it was how I landed my job was from the career fair and having that face to face with that person and getting
Mhm.
her card and following up, you know, like right after, and really
Mm.
expressing my strong interest and, you know, to have a chance. You know, the way I approached it, I think, was very humble. It's like, you know, I just need a chance, you know. You know, I think that's the advice I give.
How long were each of you out of a job? Like what, how many months?
Yeah, I was out of a job for, I think it was 14 months. And just go back to
Mhm.
your last question. I mean, with that amount of time,
Okay.
it was definitely like very hard.
Yeah.
Where, you know, I don't know if I'm emotionally complex enough to tell if I'm depressed or not, but it was definitely like, you know, like I had a lot of days where, you know, you get up in the morning, sure, you fire out, you look at the job listings, you know, at different places
Mhm.
you're applying. Oh, you see something you like. Do not think that if you go online and see a job that you're really interested in and you upload your resume that you've worked so hard on, and it's all perfect. Oh, I sent my resume and they, like Jay said, like they have a digital pile that they'll never be able to get all the way through, and it's completely blind luck. And I think they have, you know, some sort of like algorithm or technology that scans for keywords or whatever that helps them
Mhm.
narrow it down a little bit. But there's no barrier between you, a very qualified candidate, and someone who's completely unqualified just uploading their resume onto these things. I
Mhm.
don't think that, you know, HR departments really use those too closely, or sometimes they might just post a job so they have a stack of resumes for when, you know, it might not be a real listing. So I think I'm kind of shifting from the emotional part of it,
Yep.
but just like my advice, tying a lot onto what Jay said, like Jay, you know, he was saying like, oh, like a job fair at like a hotel, like that seems kind of cheesy. Like that's so much better. Like that's part of putting your ego aside.
Mhm.
But I think my advice would be, you know, definitely, you know, looking for a job as a full-time job. Like
Mm.
it's not, hey, get up, spend an hour or two, you know, doing your little digital send off stuff. Like once you've applied to every single job that's new that day that you're interested in, go on LinkedIn, find out like reach out to people. Like one thing that I struggled with, I think, in the early going, something that I do all the time now, and I see the difference is networking. And people say, how do you network? Like if you have a connection that you can use, even if it's like someone you went to middle school with and they moved away and you haven't talked in 10 years, like
Mhm.
send them a note. Like
Mhm.
you just got to advocate for yourself. Like you got to put it's kind of hard to do. You got to put like that awkwardness aside. And, you know, I will say like, you know, working at Amazon now, people reach out to me all the time. A lot of people want to work at Amazon. And having been in that position, like I don't care if I have no connection to you at all. Like I try to make time. I might not, you know, be able to make a big difference, but don't think that on the other end of your note, someone's gonna be like, why is this person reaching out to me? Or if they do think that, who cares? Because you should be sending like 10 or 12 of those, just, hey, I'm trying to do X. Seem like, you have got a really great, position or experience. I'd love to learn more from you, whatever. Like, you're not asking for anything other than just some time and advice. If you can parlay it into more than that after doing that first step, great. But, you gotta go out and get in front of people. Like doing a digital upload of your resume, like, is basically like doing jack shit. Sorry for my language.
Yeah, and I think that exactly, I agree, because it's funny because I now, as a manager and part of the leadership group and stuff, I'm really now on the other side of the fence. I look at resumes, I meet people, I have tough talks. I gotta sometimes talk to executives, like, oh, we're gonna have to lay off people. You gotta decide, and just so I know the emotions on both. And so what Connor said is true. I think a lot of times I don't see the resumes that get put in front of me. It has already gone through a filtering process, like by HR and someone behind the scenes that's looking at resumes that they don't know what you're looking for. So try to find creative ways to try to get in the door. Like, it's really like networking and those relationships you build is so important. Like, even now, like 20 years into my career, I'm still doing that. Like, I still keep in touch. I've never burned any bridges. Wherever I've worked, I keep in touch with all my former managers, because you never know, right? I think that's, whether it's now and then 20 years later, you should always have that mentality, like, building your network and reaching out to people and putting yourself out there. You got to put your ego aside. I think that's what Connor was alluding to. Is don't be afraid to, like, talk to your neighbor, your friend, whoever it is, and say, hey, I'm looking for an opportunity, and have your elevator pitch, and because you don't know what that will definitely open more doors, I think. And like, maybe trying to be creative, like try to research a company, who are the contacts, go on LinkedIn, maybe you can even, like, if you're interested in working for Mass General or Amazon, talk to me and Connor. We might know people inside and say, hey, we can get you in touch with so and so. And a lot of times those people are more interested, because especially if they trust their references, so yeah, it's really networking, and just don't be always be on your feet. Like, I know it's a tough time now, but we don't want, when the time comes and there's a green light and people are hiring again, or you get that interview and they say, hey, what did you do during the pandemic of 2020? We all were on the same boat, right? This whole world. So what sets you apart from the other candidates? What did you do during the time that like we all did, having a tough time finding a job? And so you want to be able to show that you were motivated, and even though maybe you didn't have a full-time permanent job with like salary and everything, you made the most of your time. Like, you built new skills, you volunteered, whatever it is. You got to show that. You got to show that to your prospective employers.
So I think that's a good segue to, one of the questions that was asked is, what's the most practical piece of advice you received at the time, whether it was 01 or 08, that stuck with you until now? And Jay, I know you had mentioned what your dad said, which is a job search is a full-time job in and of itself. And Connor, you were out of work for 14 months. And so, yes, you just can't sit at a computer every day for 14 months and hit, send, resume, cover letter, send. And actually what happens with a lot of people is they get rid of the cover letter. They're just hitting send, send, send. That you need to use different methods when you're in a job search. So networking, number one method. But I wanted to so there's the question about what's the most practical piece of advice you received, but I also wanted to ask, if while you were out of work, did you do anything else? Did you have to get a part-time, job, or did you do any upskilling, like professional development? Did you, all of those things, I would say, while they are not job search, they are contributing to your job search by helping to keep you, up to date in terms of your skills, or giving you something to talk about, even if it's, again, if it's a part-time job that's in service or retail or something, which is, I know right now during COVID is not available, but can provide meaningful examples and things to talk about in an interview. So I'm curious to know, best piece of advice, but also what other kinds of things you did while you were unemployed, if unless you already mentioned it.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, especially, going back to what I said, for having an extended period, it kind of becomes like it can become like a self-fulfilling prophecy at a certain point. Like, oh, you've been out of work for a year, like, maybe like, why is that? Maybe there's some reason this guy can't get a job. So I think I'd say it's definitely very important to do something. For me, like I ended up doing like kind of just like some odd jobs. Like I had painted houses in the summers before, so I did some house painting. I worked as a driver for my neighbor for a little while. Those aren't really like resume building things, but it's kind of important to just have time accounted for on your resume. If I was in the position that I was then, but now here in the COVID-19 recession, I haven't done the research of exactly what goes into this, but I would sign to be a contact tracer. And then your story, I don't know how much like barrier to entry there is for that. I'm kind of assuming that there's not a lot. I think a Tufts graduate should be able to,
we've actually had a lot of grads get hired as contact tracers. So.
Yeah, and then your story is right there. You go, you know what? Like, was that what I wanted to do my whole life? No, but I graduated into a recession, and the type of job that I'm talking to you imagining I'm in an interview, like this job wasn't available to me then. So for the last 9 months, I helped out my city and my country by being a contact tracer and doing my part to help fight the pandemic. And who's not going to like that story? Like that's just one example. There's plenty of other things that I don't know everyone on the call today, but there's things that might be if it's something that you're passionate about and it's not like on the career path that you want to be on, that is fine. It's better to have your like something to show for yourself on your resume for a time period, especially when it's like, okay, college ends, maybe there's a little period of a job and then a layoff, or maybe you're still looking for that first job. Do something. And then once you get your foot in the door in the interview, like they're not going to be like, oh, so like, what do you want to be, like a contact tracer? They're going to be like, oh, that's really cool that you did that. Now let's like completely pivot to like assuming that you're going to also have skills that are entirely unrelated to that.
Yeah, another question that did come in, I'm going to let Jay, I totally want you to weigh in, was how do you explain gaps in your resume? And I think you're right. It's if you were driving or if you were painting houses, great, whether you put that on your resume or not. You can talk about that in an interview. It's better than saying I didn't do anything. Of course, there might be reasons like if you have COVID, you had COVID yourself, or if you have family members who have have health issues, or if you're caring for family members. Well, those are things that are that's totally fair, and there are ways that you can maybe bring that up in an interview without undermining your qualifications if you're out of work and then there are other issues that are preventing you from getting a job. But Jay, I know you wanted to weigh in on that last point.
Yeah, no, I think I think that the most important thing is like Connor said, is you want to show that you made the most of your time, despite how difficult it was. I think the advantage that you all have, look at the polls, like you guys are like you guys are all young and you have like your whole career in front of you. And we're all going through probably one of the worst time probably in modern history in terms of the economy and the limited opportunity. So no one's gonna like blame you for it. Like no one's gonna say, oh, why is there's a huge gap and while everyone left and right's working. I think they're just gonna be probably more interested in knowing how did you use that time, even if it's like what Connor said, even if it's just painting houses. Like what they don't want is someone who's just sort of given up and kind of just it doesn't really have that drive and sort of just resorted to, I think that people like, people who push themselves and embrace a challenge, and have a positive energy and positive view. And I think that's very important. I think, obviously, you want to find any opportunity that comes your way, but I think if you can find opportunity where you can build some transferable skills, I think that's great. So like, even with contact tracing, like what Connor said, like there's a lot of skills there that you will develop that you can transfer to a lot of different jobs. you know, working with people, communication, organization. So look for those type of job, you know, whether it's temporary or, you know, by the hour, it doesn't matter. Like, just find something where you can, you know, either refine or develop these skills, and you know, you can transfer them. And the other thing you know, before I forget is, you know, right now, yes, you may not be able to go out there and like, you know, whether it's health reasons or other factors, but I mean, gosh, like, look at the technology we have in front of us. Like, that was not something I had like 20 years ago. Like, you could take all these online classes, online certifications. There's so much you can do online that I feel like there's not a lot of excuse not to at least like continue to build your knowledge. Maybe take a training class, you know, get a certification. I mean, you can get an Amazon cloud computing certificate. I mean, Connor, you can correct me wrong, but it's not that expensive, actually. It's like, oh, well, if you put the time and effort and go through the training classes, you could get like a cloud Amazon web services, you know, beginner level certification. I mean, imagine if you use that time, like, so in 6 months, hopefully the economy turns around and, you know, you're lucky enough, maybe Jonathan helps you, you know, open the door somewhere. You say, hey, I got this, you know, I spent this time, I got a certification, I'm ready. I just need an opportunity. I mean, to an employer, I mean, that's very impressive. So, yeah, just really use this time. Like, just, you know, really think about it. You can really use this time while things hopefully, you know, turn around in the coming months.
Yeah, just one other thing I would say, it probably goes without saying for most people, but one really stupid thing that I did is I actually turned down a job while I was unemployed, you know, just in terms of how do you like fill the time. You know, it was objectively like, just like, I really didn't, I was not excited about it at all. I went to the place, it was like a boiler room scene. I was like, but it was, you know, a legitimate job in the industry that I wanted. But it was just like, again, going back to that thing of like, you got to put your ego aside. You know, when I went in to interview at this place, I was like, oh my God, like, look at this place. But, you know, that was like June, you know, after, you know, it was laid off in March. That was like June or July, I think. I would have been so much better off. Like, you especially in this day and age, you're not like married to the company you work at. Like, if this was like the 1950s, like, it's like, oh, you work at a place for like 25 years. People move jobs like every year or two now, and then you shouldn't do that too much. But in this case, like, if you can get something that's not really kind of what you want to do, or you don't like the company or whatever it is, but now is not the time to be choosy. So yeah, I mean, I felt so stupid. I was like, damn it, I would love to have been working at that place for the last 8 months instead of like, you know, waking up and sending out resumes and, you know, collecting unemployment checks. Like, and that would have been easier for me to then move on to the next thing. If I had done that, and yeah, maybe I was only there for 8 months or a year or whatever, but you know, it's time on the
and if I can add to that, before I forget, you know, what Connor was saying is, you know, you guys have like, you know, I think for most of you, you probably, you know, now's the time to take, you know, risks that you won't be, you know, you won't want to or be able to 20 years later, whether that's maybe the job is not around where you're living now. That's fine. Like, you know, maybe go to that place and, you know, just start that opportunity. You can always move to another opportunity later down the road. Don't let those things limit you. Like, you know, I think that's something that you should remember. You know, and yeah, it's like I said, you know, don't you know, put your ego aside. Like, you know, I would say, like, even for myself, if I talk about my career, you know, I had that recession where, you know, I went through that and had to put my ego aside. But actually, you know, when I left Meditech and I joined St. Elizabeth's Medical Center, now Stewart over in Brighton, you know, as their IT, you know, systems manager, you know, I was still, you know, further along, but I was still young, and, you know, I was, you know, I just no kids yet, and I just wanted to earn some extra cash. So I took a job selling printers for Canon and HP at Best Buy, and like at the time, like, you know, Circuit City, and, you know, now, like, you know, now you know, doing that type of job where I think a lot of people probably be like, I don't want to do that, it's too low. But for me, it was, again, like, it allowed me to build a lot of connections. I was outside, you know, in the stores and trying to, you know, hone in my communication skills and presentation skills. How can I pitch a product to someone? Like I said, so that was like, I'll never trade that. Like, you know, it was just side money for me, but I felt like, you know, at that time I already learned my lesson. Don't think everything's beneath you. Like, there's an opportunity with every type of role out there. And so, It's something that, like, you will want to carry for the rest of your life, like this, putting your ego aside and not looking at, opportunities in front of you as like, beneath you or something.
Yeah, and psychologically, it helps to work every day. To be like, if you're unemployed and you're not working all day trying to fill time. So and actually what we call that is a stopgap job. So a lot of alums that I'm working with who are unemployed, we're actually doing a dual job search where we're doing something like, let's just get something to fill the gap right now, because you want to work and you need to make money. And it would be great, for you to be building skills, transferable skills, and have some things to talk about in interviews. But then while you're in that job, we can continue to do a job search for more of a career job, and there's no risk that then you're going to, to leaving that stopgap job, because someone else will need it and get it. But yeah, it's an interesting how, over time work has changed. And like Connor said, in the 1950s, people got jobs. And like my dad was at the same company for 56 years. That doesn't happen anymore. The typical amount of time is 2 to 3 years. But right now in COVID-19, you could take a job, and if you needed to leave in 5 months, people aren't going to question why, because you've never conducted a job search during a pandemic before. No one has. So unless you were around in 1917, right? Maybe that was, or I suppose we could have some of our, global international folks on who have been, in their own countries, who have, weathered pandemics. So I'm curious to know, were there things that like your resume or your LinkedIn profile or interview skills that you were kind of like, ooh, I haven't touched my resume in forever. I'm not really using I'm on LinkedIn, but I'm not really using it as I should be. Had you not, of course, if you weren't in a job search, you weren't thinking about practicing for interviews. Were there things that you really needed to get up to speed on, and how did you do that? Did you ask friends for advice? I think both of you said you may not have tapped the Career Center. What was that like, trying to get back into the mode of job search?
Yeah, I think probably one of the first things to do when you're starting a job search, whether you just got laid off or you're looking for a new job and you're at one or you haven't gotten that job yet, is probably, the resume. The resume is still an important piece. You have to produce one at some point, and they're going to look at it. And, I would say probably too much from my perspective. I might be way off base on this. In my experience, it's easy to maybe put too much emphasis on that. I see a lot of people. I'm talking to some friends of mine in the industry who are like, oh, I was like, there's an open position at Amazon, and the company's doing really well in spite of everything that's going on in the world. So you have some job security, and they're interested. Like, all right, well, let me I got to update my resume. Let me get back to you. And now 2-3 weeks has gone by, and I don't have a resume to upload into the internal referral system. Where it's like, don't worry too much about the resume.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if maybe you guys haven't been in a position where you have a resume come onto your desk and you're looking at it, but people are not reading this like it's, I don't know. You give it a glance. You kind of say, all right, let me see what they did. You're not even going to read every word on the page. So get it in good working order. Have it look nice. Make sure there's no obvious errors on it, but don't let that be you should be able to do it in an afternoon, I guess is my point. And maybe have a couple people look at it, but don't let that oh, I gotta have my resume. The resume is just sort of table stakes. I'd say the way more important stuff is going, LinkedIn wasn't as much of a thing back when I was doing this. And, Jay, back in 01, it hadn't even been invented yet. So go on LinkedIn. It costs a lot to do the premium version, but that lets you send unlimited messages to people. You don't even have to be connected to them and stuff. If you can afford, $100 out of pocket for a couple months, I'd say that's really worth it. Just doing the networking, keep it brief, if you send someone a 3-4 sentence thing, let them know who you are, what you're trying to do, a simple ask of them. It's usually just going to be for some time, 15 minutes. You used to say, hey, I'll buy you a coffee. Now it's just, maybe if you wouldn't mind jumping on a Zoom with me. It might even be easier now because you don't even have to be in person. It's less of a
I think it is
on
easier.
That person's part. I think, you know, those are the important things to me, is like take the applications and the resume, like, yep, you got to do them, but you need to do so much more than that. I think all this advice that, you know, I'm sitting here spouting off about, and all the good advice that Jay's given, it's so easy not to do. It's so easy not to. It's so easy to nod and go, oh yeah, I got to do that. It's really hard to write that first cold outreach to someone, and the second and the third. It's hard to, you know, go online and like look up, you know, who, like, find out about these jobs and stuff. It's harder to do the actual important work. But that will be the deciding factor. Like, at some point you will get really desperate. That happened to Jay and I, and that desperation will kind of really fuel you, compel you to do these things that you maybe haven't been doing already. And if you just decide to do them earlier, you'll be better off for it. And, you know, you guys might have more drive than I did, even when I was unemployed, and you're already doing all this stuff. You know, I certainly made a lot of mistakes in my process, as I've articulated some of them. So yeah, that'd be my advice.
Yeah, and I think, you know, for me, you know, I have to admit, like the last, you know, several years, I had not actually paid too much attention to my resume, and, you know, and those things. You know, fortunately, I hadn't been in that position. I've been at the place I've been working with now for 14 years, and but actually, even for myself now, years later, last year, I actually spent a good amount of time updating my resume. You know, just taking it out of the closet and just, you know, brushing it up, adding, you know, getting it up to date, refreshed, whatever you call it, because as Connor said, you never know when you'll need it, and you never know when opportunity strikes. So I think always trying to put that effort in periodically, even when you're going to be employed, you know, get your resume up to date, still work on those connections. You know, since I'm with my fellow friends here, you know, I've kept in touch with my previous manager for a long time. Like, you know, he's probably one of my best mentors. And so last year, actually, you know, you know, he had actually had some opportunities potentially for me. And so that also was one of those things why it drove me to update my resume. But I think just really to talk to Connor's point, you know, it was from those connections, that networking. You know, the resume is just something that you're gonna have to show and produce, right? But from, like, you know, like I said, he introduced me to his fellow colleagues. I met with, like, the directors. I met with the CIO of this place. You know, and there was actually a lot of momentum, if I'm going to be honest, like, until, like, you know, unfortunately when March hit, you know, the pandemic struck. And so, you know, obviously no one was ever expecting that. And I wouldn't have wanted to leave, you know, my current employer in the lurch like that, being that we're healthcare, we got to support our frontline folks. So you know, no regrets. But you know, my point is, yeah, you gotta, you know, make sure your resume gets updated periodically. Don't focus so much attention on just that resume. It's the other stuff that's going to help you. You know, the relationship building, getting yourself out there, meeting people. That takes work. You know, like Connor said, that's not waking up and having a cup of coffee and clicking submit, right? You gotta put on that suit. You gotta go up there. You gotta mingle. You gotta put your best professional image on. You gotta tell your story. You gotta, you know, pique their interest, right? Because yeah, maybe now we're kind of in a lull, but I know that you know, if things ever reopen again, you know, that door might still be open for me.
Well, and I'll mention, you know, you said getting that suit. I was talking to an alum yesterday, and we were talking about how his dad was saying, yeah, you need to buy some suits. And he's like, Dad, I don't need to buy suits. And I was like, well, you do need to be from the waist up. You need to be professionally dressed for any interviews that you have coming up. So maybe you're only buying half a suit. Maybe you'll save money. But anyway, I wanted to mention that, you know, you talked about going to that job fair at a hotel in Waltham and meeting Meditech. Yeah, we're planning our fall job fair is, you know, is on the calendar, and my colleague Jonathan, who is behind the scenes, he's actually one of the folks working on it. He could give us an update, but it's happening, and it's happening online. And so actually, for all the students who are on the call, yeah, we want you to gear up, and guess what? You need to gear up for an online version. So there's some new, you know, there's nuances to that. but it's going to happen, and we're going to continue to do all of our networking events are going to be online. So that's going to be Zoom with breakout rooms.
Yeah, and actually, sorry to interrupt you, Nicole.
No, go
That was
ahead.
my other point I want to make sure I reminded folks here today is, appropriate dress is very, very important. Like, that's been drilled in me, like, the last 10 years. That's why I'm wearing a shirt and tie today, right? I could have just worn my polo shirt and it's 90 degrees outside, but you want to respect the occasion. You want to respect who you're meeting with. They're taking the time out of their day. So I think that's something that I just worry with this, everyone being virtual now. A lot of people are working from home or, doing interviews from home, that there's sort of a more of a lax dress code. But if you're going to an online career fair, you're meeting with prospective employers, like, definitely, do yourself like a huge favor and make sure you look the part, because that can really make or break you sometimes.
Yeah, I think, oh, Connor, you want to say something?
Yeah, I'd also just add to that, like in this, like you guys have both alluded to, like in this day and age, it can be confusing about what is the appropriate attire. Right. I went to a job interview one time in a suit and tie, and it was at a startup in Brooklyn, and everyone was like, "Oh, do you have are you going to something later on?" I was like, "No, I wore this for you guys, and I looked stupid." Which, I'm not saying don't wear a suit and tie, but honestly, my advice is it is completely fine to reach out to the person that you like. Once you've made contact and you have an interview scheduled, ask them, say, what is the dress code there? Just, kind of trying to figure out. I know offices are so different these days. Like, asking questions like that, like sometimes like, oh, I don't know, should I ask them? Like, if someone asks me that question, I go, oh wow, look at this guy, like, or this woman, like he's doing this, like that tells me already something about how you might be if I hire you. Is like, you're going to ask these questions ahead of time and be prepared rather than learning on the fly. You're going to, it's such a small thing, but like, don't be hesitant to ask that type of question ahead of the interview.
Yeah, definitely. I always say, know, who you're going to meet with, how long you're going to be there. When it was in person, I used to tell people, do a test drive or get on the, figure out what the commute is. Don't leave anything unquestioned. Anything is fair to ask. What can I expect in the interview? Will there be a technical portion? Am I going to have a lunch or a meal with someone? So you should know what to expect, and then that'll help with some of the nervousness.
Yeah, and I think aside from your dressing appropriately for the occasion and the person you meet, the virtual meetings can be a challenge, right? This is not the same as your in-person. So, make sure like you're in an appropriate environment setting that looks professional and clean, and make sure that you're able to make eye contact. Something I've learned actually the last 5 months doing this is, I have a webcam, but sometimes I'm so focused looking at the screen, I'm not really making eye contact with the other person. So, and eye contact is important. So you definitely want to, make sure you're aware of those things, have good lighting, make sure you're audio, people can hear you well. You probably want to, do practice, right? With a friend or a family member, like make sure like they can see you, they can hear you. Just get all the things that you shouldn't have to worry about out of the way, right? Like make sure your headset's all charged and all silly things that you don't know but totally could derail the interview.
No, that's excellent advice, and that was one of the questions that came in ahead of time. How can I prepare for a virtual meeting or interview? How can I differentiate from others? And I think you're right. It's what's in the background, lighting, eye contact, huge thing, I think, which is pretty hard. What you're wearing, even your posture and your demeanor, during, do a test. Absolutely. If you have a Zoom interview coming up, do you need to do a practice Zoom interview with at least one person, if not more? I mean, people, when they're preparing for interviews, sometimes just sit by themselves and do the self-talk in their head, and that's by no means enough. And I would even say we have a resource called Big Interview. It's on the Career Center website, and we've had that for a while, and it simulates interviews by video. So, take advantage of that resource. It's free. Alums can use it too. So yeah, I think that is definitely something in COVID that we need to watch out for, because we are online all the time. And so some standards maybe have, shifted down. Although Connor is right, ask questions, know how you should be dressed, because it could be, not what we have in our head, not the conventional sort of suit. And other things, though, that I think have changed during COVID is, and Connor alluded to this, networking is a little bit more casual. It's, the showing up and being in person doesn't exist right now. Maybe in some geographic locations, people are still doing that with masks. But this being online all the time, I would say this is maybe something that, I think COVID has made some networking easier. So that needs to be your major method for your job search. And whether it's using LinkedIn, and actually Connor mentioned paying premium for LinkedIn, which you can sometimes get a free month of LinkedIn premium, or you can pay by less than an annual fee. But we have some great we have webinars about LinkedIn and about some of the loopholes, or how to use LinkedIn without paying for it. And in addition to LinkedIn, we also have a new resource, a new platform called The Herd. And The Herd is great because it actually generates email templates for you. So if you're like nervous, you don't know, I don't know what to put on paper, how to reach out, there are sample messages that are written for you in The Herd. Of course, we recommend tailoring those, but particularly for students, get into The Herd. There are, there are 2,000 alums in The Herd waiting to hear from you. It is for alum to alum networking too, but it's more high touch, and I think it can be a little bit of a smoother or easier transition for someone who is uncomfortable with the prospect of networking. So let's see. I want to ask if anyone has questions, any of our participants, you can throw them into the chat button. I haven't seen any come in so far. Let's see, and I'm going back to our original list of questions. Let's see. I think the good, knowing what you know now, what would you do differently? Is there anything that you didn't include already, Jay and Connor, along those lines of, are you doing anything right now, even not to say that either of you are in jeopardy of losing your job, but has this period made you think about, okay, I should be, well, Jay, you said it just, within the last several years, you hadn't been paying attention to your LinkedIn, but last year some opportunities maybe came up for you. So you were thinking about, upgrading your sort of your online profile.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, trying to answer some of the questions you asked, anything I would have done differently. I think looking back, I think I mentioned earlier, is I would have, approached my job search, with more urgency and dedication from the beginning. I think I took the summer. Like I said, I got laid off in June, so I took the summer a little bit lightly, assuming a job would be there the first time I started applying, like in September, and that wasn't the case. So it takes time to find a job. So really, start as soon as you can and put that dedication and time into it. With all the strategies that Connor and I talked about. In terms of just keeping myself up to date, yeah. I think that was one of those sort of, reminders to myself last year that, hey, you could be out of a job, and you never know, right? So I needed to also make sure I didn't get complacent. So I got my resume up to date. Even during this whole pandemic, I've really learned new skills. I've been supporting a lot of our workforce moving to virtual technologies. How do you use Zoom, Microsoft Teams? How do you stream things online? I've learned so much the last 5 months, just knowing that here's an opportunity for me. And I think that's, and one of the things I may do in the coming months is probably pursue some additional certifications to my resume, just to continue to keep myself sharp and ready.
Yeah, I would say just, I guess, maybe two things that I hadn't mentioned already. One is something that I've done multiple times later on in my career that I didn't do that first time around when I was laid off and out of the workforce is, don't hesitate to reach out to a recruiter and work with recruiters, because now, if you can work with really as many as you want. Now there's two people that are highly incentivized to find you a job. They only get paid when they place somebody. So, I'd say that's something that I would recommend. And then two, just having keeping up with, I don't know for all of you guys on the call, what various industries you're working in or trying to work in, but make sure that you are, as part of your just daily tasks, just keeping up with everything, whether that's find a podcast that is about your industry, or a publication, or if it's covered in the New York Times or whatever. But just there's so much especially when you're starting out your career, there's so much lingo and jargon that you'll need to learn for whatever that career path is, especially in mine in advertising. I can say it was my experience. I remember I used to, when I was looking for jobs, someone would say, oh, this is a cool company. I'd go check out their website and I'd read the About Us section. And I couldn't even tell what they did based on their About Us section on their corporate website. And everyone's talking about platforms and solutions. I'm what solutions? It's just kind of getting yourself acclimated to I didn't, Tufts is a liberal arts college. You probably didn't use a lot of this kind of jargon or whatever in your classes. At least I didn't. And I didn't have that. So I'd say just keeping up with whatever it is you're trying to do. So when chance favors the prepared mind. Eventually you're going to find yourself in that room with a good possible contact that you've networked with to help find a job, or it's the interview itself. And you want to just make sure that they're not able to slip a curveball by you just because you weren't really prepared for it.
Yeah, and I know we're almost time, but I want to just add on to it is it's sometimes it's not about luck and I was lucky. It's preparation meeting opportunity, right? So you want to prepare right now so that when the time comes, there's an opportunity, you're ready for it. One thing I wanted to make sure I share with all you here today is, being in the IT industry, is that be careful right now of scams and people phishing attacks and things, because there's a lot of people out there really taking advantage right now of the uncertainty and even desperation. So definitely use all the channels. Use recruiters, as Connor said. They're very helpful. They helped me land a job in the beginning of my career, so I definitely think they're helpful. But be careful of people who don't have good intentions and may try to scam you, because they know there's a lot of people out there who are desperate. So
that's good. That's great advice, and you're exactly right. Well, we have come to the end of our hour. I want to be respectful of our panelists' time and of our participants' time. So, on behalf of the Career Center, thank you so much, Jay and Connor. This was so valuable, and it was really thank you for being open to sharing what was a difficult time in your lives, and for the participants, Connor and Jay mentioned at the beginning that they're open to hearing from you. You can find them on LinkedIn, but also you can reach out to me, Nicole Anderson, at Alumni Career Services, and I can get you in touch with them. My email is nicole.anderson@tufts.edu, and maybe my colleague John can put that into the chat. But we learned so much today, and it was really helpful. This is a challenging time. I think that having to go through a job and or internship search, even a grad school application process during this time, if you can get through it, then you will be prepared for another challenging time that could come up again. And Connor and Jay are proof of this, that they've been through something that was hard and they've weathered the storm, and they're here to talk about it today. So thank you so much again, Jay and Connor. We really appreciate it. And everyone, yeah.
Yep. And feel free to share our contact information too, and look forward to hearing from some of you.
Great.
Yeah, same here. Happy to connect one-on-one with anyone that is interested.
Okay. Everyone, take care, and we're going to sign off now. Thank you.